One of the key concepts that emerged when people started studying predator-prey interactions was the idea of a keystone species. And this was originally coined by Bob Payne. And the idea is that there are some species that have a disproportionately big impact on the ecosystem, even though they're not really very abundant. And we've just seen an example when we looked at the urchins, but here's another. This is the bumphead parrotfish again. They aren't very numerous on a reef, but they have a very large impact. And as we've seen, removing the keystone species can lead to a very large impact on the ecosystem. Now, so far we've really focused on the direct effects of predators on their prey, trying to eat them. But in fact, many would argue that some of the most important impacts of predators on their prey are affecting their behavior, effectively scaring them to death. And so many of the things that happen in ecosystems are result of the prey being terrified of the predator, and that the prey has to spend much of its time looking around for the predator. And whilst it's doing that, and whilst it's hiding, it doesn't feed. It might feed less, it might grow less, it might be more vulnerable to predators, it might not reproduce so successfully. So the effect of fear on prey can be really very important. Okay, so we can make the point then that predators don't just affect their prey through direct consumption, they also affect them through changing the behavior of the prey. And here's an example. Let's imagine a situation now where we have at the top some large predators. These are large groupers. These are an important predator. There's also a smaller predator hiding away in that coral. And that's the coral trout looking fish that's just in amongst the coral there. And then we can see a few small parrotfish, which are the prey item of the smaller predator here. Now, in this situation, the smaller grouper, which is the one that's hiding, is hiding from the big predator. And therefore the chances that this smaller predator is going to manage to get out from its hiding place and catch these prey is relatively low, because there's lots of predators around. Now let's imagine that humans came along and we took out some of those bigger predators. And what we have now is the prey is still cruising around, but now it's much more likely that that smaller predator is going to feel empowered to go out and spend more time foraging, looking for prey. It might be more successful and it'll take off. And this is something that really happens in ecosystems, and we call this trophic cascades, where an effect at one part of the food web cascades to affect other parts of the food web. And here's an example of some work that we did in Belize, which shows just such a trophic cascade on a coral reef. So again, we have our large groupers, which are a top or high-level predator at least. Then there's some mesopredators, or smaller, medium-sized predators, and then their prey, which are the damselfish, which we've seen before at the bottom. Now, in the 1980s and 1990s, in Belize, the numbers of top predators here, the grouper, were fairly abundant. I mean, they were still lower than they ideally should be, because there was a fishery for them, but they were still pretty common. A few years later, in the early parts of 2000, by that point, humans had fished so many of these top predators that their numbers had become far more scarce. And as a result, there were fewer of the large grouper. That meant that more of the mesopredators could grow and forage freely, and as a result, the numbers of their prey declined. And so we have a fundamental change in the way the ecosystem is structured. So we're talking about food webs, we're looking at human impacts on food webs, and fundamentally the actions that we have can cascade through entire food webs and change what's out there on reefs and how we will then value what's left. Typically we might end up with an ecosystem that might be very different from what it looked like before humans came along and had some kind of impact of their own.